Have you ever been completely sure about something, like totally certain, and then found out you were wrong? Not just a little wrong, but wrong in a way that makes you question your own mind. That happens to people all the time. But what if it wasn't just you? What if thousands of people all across the world who have never met each other, who grew up in different countries, different cultures, different generations, all remembered the exact same thing that never actually happened? That is the Mandela Effect, and it is one of the strangest, most unsettling phenomena in modern psychology. Because it does not feel like a mistake. It feels like a memory, a real, clear, specific memory. And yet, the record says it never happened. The name comes from Nelson Mandela. He was the anti-apartheid activist who became the first black president of South Africa and one of the most recognized figures of the 20th century. But here is the thing. A massive number of people, and we are talking tens of thousands of people who have come forward online, and likely many more who never said anything, believe that Nelson Mandela died in prison in the 1980s. They remembered it. Some people remembered the news coverage. Some remembered their parents talking about it. Some remembered a feeling of sadness when they heard the announcement. There was just one problem. Nelson Mandela did not die in prison. He was released in 1990. He went on to win the Nobel Peace Prize. He became president of South Africa. He lived until 2013. He had an entire second half of his life that millions of people somehow had no memory of, because in their minds, he was already gone. A woman named Fiona Broome was the first person to really document this. She was at a convention in 2009 and started talking to other attendees about Mandela's death in prison, expecting them to know exactly what she was referring to. And they did. Multiple people in that room shared the same memory. So she went home and started a website. She called the phenomenon the Mandela Effect. And once the internet got hold of it, people started flooding in with their own examples. Suddenly, it became clear that the Mandela case was not a one-off. It was part of something much bigger and much weirder. Because once people started paying attention, the examples started piling up fast. There is the Monopoly Man. If you close your eyes and picture him right now, a lot of people see a chubby guy in a top hat with a monocle over one eye. That image feels iconic. It feels real. Except the Monopoly Man has never had a monocle. Not once in the entire history of the game. The character is named Rich Uncle Pennybags, and he has always had two fully visible eyes. But people do not just vaguely think he had a monocle. They are confident about it. They will argue about it. Then there is the Berenstain Bears, a hugely popular children's book series that millions of kids grew up reading. Except a shocking number of adults remember it being spelled Berenstain with an E at the end instead of an A. This one hit people hard because it felt so specific. It wasn't like misremembering a plot or a character. It was a spelling, something fixed and printed on the cover of a book you held in your hands as a kid. And yet the name has always been Berenstain. Always. The family who created the books, Stan and Jan Berenstain, had that name their whole lives. There was never an alternate version. There is also the famous line from Star Wars, Darth Vader's big reveal to Luke Skywalker. Most people are sure the line is, "Luke, I am your father." It is one of the most quoted movie lines in history. People have said it at Halloween parties and in school hallways for decades. But the actual line is, "No, I am your father." Luke is never addressed by name. If you go back and watch the scene, it's right there. But the version with Luke's name at the front is so deeply embedded in popular culture that it almost does not matter what the movie actually says. So what is going on here? Why does this keep happening? And why does it happen to so many people at the same time? Psychologists have a few explanations, and the most important one centers on something called reconstructive memory. This is a concept that the researcher Elizabeth Loftus spent her career studying, and her findings are genuinely disturbing if you think about them too long. Memory is not like a video recording. It doesn't just sit in a file in your brain and play back perfectly whenever you need it. Every time you remember something, your brain is actually rebuilding that memory from scratch, using fragments, associations, emotions, and context. And every time you do that, the memory can shift slightly. You might absorb something you heard or read since the original event. You might fill in a gap with something that makes logical sense. You might combine two separate memories into one. Loftus ran experiments where she could actually plant false memories into people's heads just by asking them leading questions. People would come out of those sessions genuinely convinced they had experienced something that never happened to them.
But that still does not fully explain the group part. Why do thousands of strangers share the same specific false memory? Here is where it gets interesting. Psychologists point to something called social reinforcement. When a false memory matches a story or image that is already floating around in popular culture, it spreads. People hear the wrong version of the Darth Vader line so many times in jokes and references that the wrong version becomes the one that feels right. The Monopoly Man looks like the kind of character who should have a monocle. It fits the visual language of old-fashioned wealth, so the brain adds one. The Berenstain spelling looks unusual and slightly wrong to people used to common name endings, so the brain corrects it to something more familiar. The false memory is not random. It is almost always a version that makes more intuitive sense than the real thing. And then there is the internet. Before online communities existed, a person with a false memory would either keep it to themselves or maybe mention it to a few friends. Now they can post about it and instantly find 1,000 people who feel the exact same way. That shared confirmation makes the false memory feel even more real. It stops feeling like a mistake and starts feeling like evidence. Of course, not everyone accepts the psychology explanation. There is a whole corner of the internet that believes the Mandela Effect is proof of something far stranger. Some people argue it is evidence of parallel universes, that at some point in the recent past, our timeline merged with a slightly different one, and some people brought memories from the other version with them. The idea is rooted in the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, which is a real concept in physics, even if most physicists would strongly disagree that it has anything to do with people misremembering the Monopoly Man. Others have suggested that reality itself was altered at some point, that someone or something went back and changed history, and the glitches people remember are the traces left behind. These explanations are obviously a stretch, but the fact that they exist at all says something interesting about what the Mandela Effect actually is. It is not just a psychology curiosity. It is a challenge to one of the things we trust most about ourselves, the idea that our memories are ours, that they belong to us, that they happened. Most of us walk around treating our memories as the most personal and reliable thing we have. The Mandela Effect says that is not quite right, that the story in your head is partly borrowed, partly constructed, and partly just a best guess your brain made when you weren't paying attention. And that is honestly more unsettling than any alternate universe theory, because if your brain can confidently remember something that never happened, something specific, something emotional, something you would have sworn on, then how many other things in your memory are built the same way? How much of what you know about your own life is real, and how much is just the version your brain decided to keep? That question does not have a clean answer, but it's the reason the Mandela Effect keeps pulling people in. It's not really about Nelson Mandela or a cartoon bear's last name. It's about what it means to remember something, and whether that is ever really enough.